This is the smell of the leftover tuna fish sandwich you left in your lunchbox over the weekend in a wimpy trash bag.
Wimpy, wimpy, wimpy!
Blech! And this is the smell of that same sandwich in a hefty, ultra-strong trash bag.
Hefty, hefty, hefty!
Ah, smell the difference? Hefty Ultra Strong has Arm & Hammer with continuous odor control, so no matter what's inside your trash, you can stay one step ahead of stinky. And for bigger jobs, try the superior strength of Hefty Large Black Bags.
Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to be talking about a story that, Chris, I was first introduced to through a horror movie a number of years ago. And it's a story about a situation in East Chester, Nova Scotia that occurred in the early to mid 1900s. And it had to do with the Ideal Maternity Home there in East Chester, Nova Scotia. And Chris, this story is really disturbing.
Yeah, and you know, we're doing this podcast in 2022 when there are a lot of news events that are out there dealing with young children and proper care of children. And you're absolutely right. There is, I think, as our listeners become more involved in this conversation, that they will find that there's no way this could have happened. But yet, it was because of political red tape, because of maybe turned eyes and the opportunity to make a buck here or there, that many corners were cut, and there were a lot of things that were done that is absolutely horrific, despicable, and I mean, Ray, it turns my stomach just talking about these things.
Yeah, it is one of those stories. I think on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most disturbing, this thing's probably a 9.
Yeah, and you have to ask yourself, you know, was that really what they intended when this whole thing opened up, you know, or did, once again, is it this power thing and this opportunity for money, or, you know, because if we start thinking through this, this scandal starts brewing in the largest maternity home, but not everybody was really against this couple for doing what they were doing, but actually there were some people who said, hey, you're actually making a contribution to the local economy, you're dedicated to the mission field of service to unwed mothers, you're trying to create happy families, you're doing adoption. And so on the, you know, the outer, it might have been seen as something that was really, really good, but there was a deep, dark story that would be unfolding through that.
Yeah, I think the people who, we'll say, quote unquote, defended it, they didn't know at the time everything that was going on. So the story centers around this couple called William and Lila Young. They opened in 1928 a maternity home there in Chester, Nova Scotia. They called it the Ideal Maternity Home. Now, in case you're wondering, were these people really qualified to open such a home? Well, William Young was a chiropractor, and his wife Lila referred to herself as an obstetrical specialist. I'm not real sure what that is or what training she had in 1928 to give herself that title, but they provided maternity care and also adoption services for these young women. And I think, Chris, we have to go back to the time period. This started in 1928, and this home actually ran, I believe, until 1947. And East Chester was a port town, Chris, so it was this place where people would be coming and going quite a bit.
And unfortunately, there were women who found themselves to be expectant, not through traditional means. And so this maternity home promised to these unwed mothers, and this is also during that time, listeners will think about some of our other podcasts that we've talked about. There was a moral revolution, if you will. There were people who looked down on people who were having children out of wedlock. And so the Young said, we're going to provide this place. It's going to be a maternity home. It will be discreet. We'll keep the names out of it. It will be very private. We're going to protect these young mothers from society's judgment. We are going to not allow gossip to ruin people's lives. And so people saw this as a great opportunity because they were going to protect these young mothers, but also they would protect these children because they would have adoption services that were going to kind of come in and help. However, the problem is that this Ideal Maternity Home, while offering these services, was very expensive. And many of these people who were having children out of wedlock simply could not afford the amount of money that was charged, because I think the average weekly wage around that time was $8, and something that came like to be used for this service was like $500. So
yeah, it was $500 to $600 for the service, and the women. And this is a part of sort of a dark side of the story. The women who would go there and could not pay the $500 or $600, they would work off the costs. So they were exploiting the labor of these women who found themselves in very difficult life circumstances.
And as difficult as it is, but now imagine that you are giving up this child, but yet now you're asked to stay there and to provide care for that child and the other children that were there. I mean, the emotional toil that came upon those women must have been absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, and I remember reading that it was over a year that they would say, about a year and some months, that women would have to stay there to work off the cost of the services that were being provided by the Ideal Maternity Home.
So they're charging $500 to provide the birth process for these families, and then they're turning around and selling, that's the only word that I think that we can use, selling babies that they would claim to be adoption. Say they're doing that for about $1,000, and I read somewhere that they were taking in approximately $3.5 million just from adoption. That's how much, and to the point where all of a sudden the Ideal Maternity Home gets this extreme makeover. They move into this new building, have like 54 rooms in it. I mean, it's just, something's wrong when you go from a very small house to like a 54 room place in a matter of, a year or so. Something's going on that could lead to some questions.
Yeah, because, they were charging these women $500 to $600 a pop. And then they were selling these babies for, over $10,000. And remember, this is, 1928, 1938, 1947. $500, $600 then was a lot more than $500 or $600 today. So when we talk about them selling these babies for $10,000 or more a baby, they're making a lot of money off of this immoral trade.
And to speak back to the immoral, so I think we've set this up pretty good. So say this woman is going to have a baby and she's going to give it up for adoption, but she can't pay for that, for the delivery services. So she has to stay there and work it off. And so she has the baby. The Youngs are in preparation to give it up for adoption. The mom is working as a nanny in the room. Mm-hmm. And Ray, there was a story that said that if there was a mother changed her mind, she had the baby, she had said she wanted to give it up for adoption, but because she was working there, she grew attached to that baby and said, no, I've changed my mind, I want to keep it. Well, the Youngs would then charge that mother $10,000 to get back her baby.
Right.
And if she paid that money, which, by the way, they're only making $8. This is a day. But let's say she was able to find a way to pay back the $10,000. The Youngs had final authority as to whether or not they would even give her back the baby after she had already paid. So this is completely a sham operation that is going on that is purely designed to make money. And Ray, I just don't understand how someone can... We haven't even gotten to the dirty part of it. It's already horrendous. Yeah. But how can someone morally do these things is just beyond me.
Yeah, these people, William and Lila, they were certainly, they certainly had a lot of issues. Just putting it mildly, because like you said, we haven't even gotten to the really dark stuff yet. But I think we're at a point, I think, where we could start moving in that direction. We talked about the fact that they had improved the location where they were they were running their business, the Ideal Maternity Home. But what happens inside the walls of that maternity home maybe wasn't what people on the outside, supporters and politicians who were defending them. I think what was going on inside that maternity home was very different from what they thought. In 1945, there was a mother who went into the home, and she came out and she told the story about what she saw in that home. And basically the picture she paints is as of an overcrowded, stinky, dirty place where these children are just sort of like 2, 3, 4 children in a crib. The place reeks of urine. It's just unclean. It's dirty. It's not fit for these small children to be in, and it's certainly not a fit place for a mother to give birth.
And to go along with that, I think I remember they were putting 3 or 4 babies in one crib.
Yep.
That they were feeding them molasses, I think, and that's a huge no-no, I guess, when it comes to treating young children.
Yeah, and it really, what they fed them and how they handled the situation depended on the baby. Okay, so they did have babies they considered to be, and I'm just using their phrases here, unmarketable. In other words, they could not sell these babies. They weren't going to find a adoption option for these babies. So these babies, they would only feed them molasses and water, and it would take the babies 2 to 3 weeks to die. So it's a situation where the babies who are considered unmarketable, they're basically setting them aside to starve to death on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you have babies that they considered marketable who are being sold, and the parents most of the time have no idea what's going on. There are reports about women who went there to give birth and they didn't have any intention of giving their baby up for adoption. They just wanted to go, maybe have help through this process and then come out the other side with their baby. They're told the baby died after childbirth. But the reality was they had taken the baby and sold it on the black market.
And to help our listeners once again understand the disgusting nature of this practice, what was considered unmarketable were children who had birthmarks, they had deformities, maybe they had some hereditary medical conditions. But Ray, just another terrible aspect of this is that an unmarketable baby, according to the Youngs, were individuals who were dark-skinned,
right,
or who were mixed.
Yep.
Because in their mind, a marketable baby was someone that was white and looked healthy and had no defects. Mm-hmm. And that is what their litmus test, if you will, in determining what was marketable and unmarketable. And so, as you mentioned, those that were unmarketable, they put them in a different place, and they basically did what they needed to do for them to die.
Yeah, and I think this is where we get into the story of the so-called Butterbox babies, because the Butterbox babies are those babies that were deemed to be unmarketable, and effectively, like we already said, they would receive only molasses and water for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they would die. And what would happen apparently was that William and or Lila would take these small children and they would put them in these small wooden grocery boxes known as butter boxes, and they would bury them outside the house. I think there was a cemetery nearby, if I remember correctly. They would bury them in unmarked graves there. Some of them they think may have been burned up in the fireplace. Others they suspect may have been thrown out into the ocean. But effectively, they're starving these children to death after misleading the mother about exactly what was going to happen, because some of these mothers probably thought their child was going to go up for adoption, and in fact the child's taken away and starved to death. Some of these mothers probably thought they were going to get their child back, and instead the child starved to death or sold, and the mother's told, well, the child died shortly after childbirth. So you have this situation where these people are literally deceiving people, and then they're burying the bodies of these babies on the property of this building. Now, to be a little fair here, the Butterbox babies, the accounts of the babies being buried in the butter boxes and all of this. It is a little disputed because I don't believe they've ever found any hard evidence that this kind of thing actually went on there. But there's accounts that around about 100 babies are buried in unmarked graves near the house, and that's not included others that, like I said, were burned or thrown out to sea or something else. But there are people who say, well, we don't have any physical proof. We don't have any skeletons. We don't have anything in a butter box. We don't have the physical proof to say, yes, this actually happened. So there is some doubt as to if the worst of the worst of this, the babies in the butter boxes, actually happened. But as one article I read said, even if it didn't happen, we still have a bad story here because of the condition these children were kept in, because of the selling of babies on the black market, because of the deception that these women were being put through when they were going there, thinking that they were going somewhere that would take care of them and their children, and actually going somewhere that was taking advantage of them.
And while this is taking place in Canada, there is also a strong presence of the Youngs being found here in America. Yeah. And they used advertising to be able to promote their business, and how they drummed up individuals coming, because the process for adoption going through the normal way, individuals who have adopted children in today's society will tell you that the process is extremely long, it is extremely complex, and it is astronomically expensive. And that's in today's society of trying to adopt a child. So here you have individuals desperately wanting a child, and you have the young saying, we have lovely babies for adoption, they have excellent health background, they have healthy bodies, and word of mouth starts to spread, and these individuals go, and I guess you could say it's a smoke and mirrors approach. When people arrive at the maternity home, they show them the good place, they show them the nice stuff, and they don't, show them all of the other things that are going.
They don't show them the rooms that smell like urine.
Right, and it was very interesting that I was doing some reading, and that most adoption and child welfare laws in most states in the 1930s and 40s were very restrictive as to where children could go. For instance, they forbade adoption placements across religious lines, and so we see that there was a shortage of Jewish children that were available through reputable child welfare organizations. And so that's why you see a strong relationship with the Youngs and Jewish families in New Jersey and New York who said, we can't adopt. These local areas are not allowing us to do this. And so what happens is, it's like, well, the Youngs are offering a service, and there's nothing wrong with this. And I guess, Ray, the question would be, how could this go on for so long without someone putting a stop to it?
Yeah, that is a very good question. How did this go on there in Eastchester, Nova Scotia, without the authorities sort of saying, wait a minute, what in the world's going on here? And the reality of, there were people looking into this. There were investigators looking into it. But I think the major problem, without going into all of the details, the major problem was that the laws in Nova Scotia at the time were not set up in such a way that would allow the investigators the access and give them the power to shut this place down. So they tried multiple times to go after the Youngs, whether it was charging them. One time they were charged with fraud for charging they were charging somebody basically for child care when the child had already died.
Right.
So you have things that they're trying to get to them with, but a lot of this stuff, at the end of the day, they just weren't able to get the evidence they needed to actually pin the nail on the young, so to speak.
And once again, we don't want to get too deep into the woods with politics in Nova Scotia, but there was some very personal issues between, I forget what his department was. He was the head of medical affairs or health affairs for Nova Scotia, and he seemed to have just an issue against the Youngs, and the Youngs had an issue against him, and they found themselves kind of having a defamation kind of court case, and you know that there was more he said, she said, instead of let's actually go and do research. And even when people did go and investigate the home, once again, they didn't do the deep dive. They just looked at the various areas that were given to them, because I think, I think that the government in Nova Scotia did see this as a positive thing, because they were providing adoption services and they were helping those who were less fortunate. They were, instead of having a lot of children just kind of scattered about, they thought they were helping. And I guess it was one of those, I don't want to dig deep of what we are afraid we might find. And yet that was the one thing they should have been doing all along.
Yeah, and it's actually not until 1946 that they're actually able to convict them on something, and that was illegally selling babies to 4 American couples. And they were fined $428. I think that was the best the authorities could really do at the time. Because, even today, like I said earlier, we don't have evidence of the Butterbox babies. We know that there were a lot of children who were sold out of the Ideal Maternity Home, but at the end of the day, there just wasn't a lot of evidence, and the government didn't have the power at the time to really step in and put a stop to this. And like you said, some of it may have been there were people in positions of authority who didn't want to.
Right. And ultimately, the sad part of this is that the ultimate demise of the Youngs in their home was not government. It wasn't the law. It was that defamation suit that they went after. And, they actually, the home was closed because there was an article that appeared, an expose, if you will. And so the Young said, you know what? Our character's been injured, our credit, our reputation, we've suffered extreme damages, and they sued for something like $25,000. And what happens is it's the trial itself over their trial. They're wanting the $25,000, and basically what happens is the lawyer is able to use the charges in that article to kind of put it into court and to share with the public everything that is going on. And where you mentioned the Butterboxes, that's where that comes in, right? It comes in through trial, where he's able to throw that in there saying, well, you know what? We found these Butterboxes, obtained from some local grocer. Babies are being put. I mean, my gosh, that is just damning evidence for somebody. It's hard to recover from that. And so I think that's what they remember, right? And that's how we started this podcast, the Butterbox. Yep. People remember when they think, especially in Nova Scotia, they think of Butterbox, it becomes a symbol of the Youngs and their questionable practices. And I think that's how you have to look at that.
Yeah, and ultimately, of course, they do shut down the Ideal Maternity Home. And they do something with it that I found was very interesting. They turn it into a tourist hotel, an old age home. So, and Lila continues to do her obstetrical practice there as well along the side until ultimately both Lila and William die. She dies in 1967. I believe it was leukemia. He died in 1962, I believe, of lung cancer. So Chris, I think the question is, what do we think about the Butterbox babies? I mean, we've talked about the condition of the home. We talked about the some of the stuff that was going on with them legally. We've talked about their selling the babies. But what do we think about the Butterbox babies themselves? Do we think there's somewhere up there in Nova Scotia there were baby bodies being taken out of this home and put in these unmarked graves, thrown out to sea, or burned in the fireplace?
Yeah, and there's I remember in doing the research is that there are plenty of survivor accounts of this home, and you go back and you read some of their accounts, which are absolutely so disturbing and so depressing, that these adoptees that come about. I think that it is true because they lived it.
Yeah.
And I mean, yes, they were babies, and sure, they were still developing and things of that nature. But there's reports of witnesses who are saying that 400 to 600 were deliberately killed.
Yep.
And I think there's a lot to be said about that. Also, they've had conversations from the grocer. I don't remember the name of the grocer where they went. So unfortunately, I think that whether I don't know if they put them in the Butterbox themselves, but I do believe the cremation and the throwing them out to sea and the Fox's Point, I think, is the place you were talking about where they had the open grave, if you will. Yeah. I think that it's there, and I remember there was the book, I think, that probably turns into the movie or documentary or whatever it is, where the person basically said, I am a Butterbox baby. That whether it was a person that was dead or a person who lived through that horrendous experience, that just the fear of Butterbox. Because I remember there was one other survivor who said, I keep a Butterbox in my closet. And every morning I look at that Butterbox and I'm reminded I could have been that person. Yeah. And whether that's true or not, that the person was put in, or the baby was put into that, the reality that there is an individual today who looks at that Butterbox and says, this is my moment. It could have been me. Make the most of my life. I think there's a story there for all of us to appreciate life and to live it out to the very best. I also would say, if there's anything good in this, it is that abortion laws were really honed down. These foster homes and adoption homes and other things, there's a lot of laws that go into it nowadays that are designed to protect individuals and to protect these situations. But it's a story that we did not know about, but it's one that we should. And it is a story of pain. It's a story of grief. But it's also a story of the importance of history you didn't know but should. Yeah.
And just to put some numbers, while we wrap this thing up, just to put some numbers in context, Chris, you mentioned 400 to 600 babies possibly died in the walls of the Ideal Maternity Home. It's estimated between 1928 and 1946 there was between 800 to 1,500 babies born in the home. So if you look at that on the top end, 1,500 babies born, 600 babies deliberately killed. They're killing more babies than they're selling in this particular home, either way we look at it. So very disturbing story, but like Chris said, a very important story for us to learn from.
So Ray, I really appreciate you bringing this topic for discussion today, because I think in the context of the society we're living in, we need to appreciate life for what it is and take each moment for what we are given. I want to encourage our listeners to please take time to pass this podcast and any of the other ones that are in the archives along to others in your home, in your community. It's a great podcast to listen to if you got a short commute, or who knows, even if you need help falling asleep. But we encourage you to contact us with future episodes, topics that you would like us to address. We are so fortunate that you are able to find us on any of the major players that have podcasts out there today, but Sounder and Stitcher and Spotify are some of the more popular ones. Also, please take a moment to go and like us on our Facebook page. Drop a comment. Tell us how you're using these podcasts and if they're helpful. And it makes two old guys feel good to know that they're out there being reached and people are finding what we talk about to be interesting. And also, any ideas that you have, we welcome those. Thank you so much for allowing us to come into your homes and come into your cars as we journey together through life, learning more about history that we didn't know but should. So as for Ray and Chris, we thank you so much and hope that you have a blessed day.